doing, guys? Today we are in the engine assembly room, also known as my basement. And what we're going to do today is we're going to go over the Kohler engine. Actually, I have a Briggs & Stratton engine here all set to go pretty much. I can't wait to work on this one. Oh man, the old L head. Actually, the videos for that motor are pretty much all done. I just haven't posted them up. Things to come. But anyways, we're going to go ahead and start putting or getting what we need for the Kohler K91 rebuild. I got my little Harbor Freight bore gauge and my dial caliper. I already know you're supposed to use a set of micrometers. Relax. If we're building a race engine, then we'll use a micrometer. But for a little air-cooled engine, we're good enough. So we're going to go ahead and take the measurements. I keep saying make the measurements. We're going to take the measurements. We're going to take one with the crank on the top, in the middle, below, or at the bottom, I should say, and then 190 degrees from the crank. Top, middle, bottom. I would expect that the measurements from 90 degrees or perpendicular to the crank will be just a few thousandths more than with the crank because of the piston, the way the piston rocks. That'll usually wear out the front and the back of the bore as well as down at the bottom where the crankshaft is kind of making that loop. So let's go ahead and take those measurements and see where we are. Okay, after some measuring, we have learned a couple things here. Got my standard paper that I always have. AB axis, A is with the crank, B is perpendicular to the crank. The measurements that we got, and I measured each linear line twice, top, middle, bottom, and then I averaged them out just to make it simple. So with the crank, top, middle, bottom, perpendicular, top, middle, bottom, then took those averages. The standard bore a standard bore would be 2.3750. This bore is 0.0226 on average. So a little bit big, but when we looked at the piston that came out of it, I was questioning whether or not that was a 1 or a 2. Clearly, it's a 2. This is a 20 over piston. So this block has been at one point bored 20 over. The next measurement I wanted to take was the skirt clearance. This side of the piston, the skirt clearance to the bore. Now, with the skirt measured out to be 2.3890. With the calipers, that might vary a little bit, but using the with the crank measurement of 2.3976 minus subtract that amount from, this amount from that amount. Sorry, the piston skirt measurement from the average bore measurement. That gave us a 0.086 skirt to bore clearance. With the spec is saying 3 to 4 thousandths. If we look at the book, it says right here, the thrust face, that's the side of really 3 to 4 thousandths. So this motor is a little bit large and what we would consider out of spec for that measurement. But again, for this motor, for what it's going to be used for, which is it's just going to be a putt-putt motor around the shows, just a good solid, just to make a good solid running engine. Now, if you were going to go and mow the lawn every single weekend for the next 20 years, yeah, you're probably going to run into a problem. But the piston's not scraped up that much. It's in great shape. So we're just going to reuse this 20 over piston. Why there's orange paint in it, I have no idea. Whatever machine shop did this, or whoever did it, they sprayed the bottom of the rod and the bottom of this piston with orange paint. I have no idea why, but if you guys know why, leave a comment below. I don't know if that's the international marking that the engine's been rebuilt, but so that's that. So we're going to have to order 20 over piston rings for that. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and measure out the crank pin, see where we are with that. Okay, so I measured the crank just for conversation purposes. The measurement from here to the bottom of the journal, that I call the thrust measurement, because that's where the rod kind of goes up and down. Not up and down, but that's where the forces are applied. And the non-thrusts are on the sides, because when the crankshaft comes up, the piston wants to kind of go up, and then when the power stroke comes down, it pushes down on the, basically right about here, and then it spins around. Okay, so the measurements is 936 on the non-thrust side and 9355 on the thrust side. And when we take a look at the book, the journal size is to be 9360 to 9355. So it's basically fine. So we're going to go ahead and order a standard rod for this. I did do the valve seats to 45 degrees because that's what my cutter is. I think it's supposed to be 44.5 or something like that. And the valve face is supposed to be 45. Anyway, again, it doesn't matter. We're just going to lap the poop out of them and get them. But we're going to get 2 new valves. We'll get 2 new valves. We're going to get 20 over piston ring set, a standard rod, and a full gasket kit. And that should get us exactly where we need, where we can start putting the engine back together. So let me go, I got to confirm with the owner that that is okay to go ahead and purchase those parts, number one. Number two, once they come in, we'll continue this video. The 20 over ring set showed up. So what we're going to do is we're going to end gap these rings now to make sure they're close enough to spec. Because, we are working with a bore with a little bit of wear in it. So, we're not going to be, probably not going to be like absolutely dead nuts, but as long as we're close. We're going to use our little feeler gauge. I am going to put a little bit of WD-40 in the bore here, at least at the top, slide it down below where you would think there would be a ridge in the bore, so that way we get a little bit more accurate reading of what the end gap is, and we'll compare those measurements to the book. The end gap's measured out as top ring was 14, middle ring was 16, oil control ring was 15, and then I had to figure out which ring was which, because even though the package said one compression ring, and then an oil control ring, it didn't tell you which one is the top one and which one's the middle one, because the middle one has a groove in it where the groove has to go down, and the top ring has a bevel in it, which the bevel has to go up, and I'll show you that eventually when we go ahead and install the rings on the piston. That'll be it on the assembly video. But for this purposes, we got our measurements, and you say, well, boy, I wonder where that lays out. K91 ring end gap 7 to 17 thousandths. So obviously we're on the high side of the specification, but we are within specification, so these are good to go. I did, for the blueprint card that I'll give the owner when I'm all done, obviously I won't give him this piece of paper, but I like to write down what all the measurements were for the motor when I turn it over to the owner. So top ring 14, second ring 16, oil control ring 15. Still waiting on the rod in the gasket set, so as soon as those come in, we can actually, and the valves. So the next part would be to lap the valves and set the valve lash. So once those come in, we'll move on to the next step. Some more parts came in for the Kohler, the aftermarket valves, and the aftermarket rod. The aftermarket valves are on the left of the pair, and the original ones that came out of the motor are on the right of the pair. Took my dial calipers, took some measurements. Everything is about the same. The only thing that's a little bit different and is kind of interesting, when we take a look at the overall length of the valves, the aftermarket one, this is the intake specifically, is super long. I mean, there's a ton. Now, where the pin goes for the spring retainer, that's in the same measurement, but man, I'm gonna have to grind a lot in order to get the lash set correctly for the intake. Now, on the exhaust, there's a reasonable amount of extra length there, which won't be that hard, but we will have to lap them into the seats first before we set the lash. The other thing I got today was the aftermarket connecting rod. This is an NOS connecting rod for K91, and you can see that overall they visually look about the same. The one thing I will say is I think the aftermarket rod is a little bit better, and let me see if I can show you. So if I tip this rod, the NOS rod, up, and I grab the aftermarket rod, you can see where the bolts are. It's definitely thicker on the aftermarket rod, which is kind of interesting. You know, it's just a little bit beefier. It's not as, I guess, casted thinly where the bolts go. The actual size of the rod is the same, meaning length, center to center, width, the I-beam, or the I-beam construction. Overall, the drain hole looks nice and clean. The one thing that they did do on the aftermarket rod, which is not done on the Kohler standard rod, is they did chamfer the oil return hole, or the drain, if you want to call it that. Because if we go ahead and take a look at this one, you can see the stock rod, or the replacement Kohler rod, it's just a hole. So that's kind of interesting. Overall, nothing too major. We have the part number casted in the side, and the company that I guess that makes it is St. Bird. There's an interesting little picture here. If we hold it this way, take a look at that picture, this guy might have a problem, if you know what I mean. It's a joke. But anyways, just don't get that sheet metal bolt retainer like you do with the stock or with the Kohler replacement rods. You get a set of lock washers. So we're going to use the lock washers and also put in a little bit of blue Loctite. So next, I did clean and surface the head, so that's all set to go. What we're going to do next is go ahead and lap the valves into the seats. Valves have been lapped. Everything went good. The mark on the valve faces looks nice and smooth and right in the middle of the valve face. So I'm happy with that. The valve seats themselves look really good. So that's it for this video. Because we went over parts, we got things pretty much lined up. So we're right at the point now where we can start putting this thing together. Specifically, the next thing is to set the valve lash, but we'll do that at a later date. One thing I did want to show you, this beautiful little box just showed up today, and inside this box is a delivery from Miller Tire. Let's just get that out of the way, pull this thing out. Oh yeah, those are going to be the front tires for my Senior. So I'm looking forward to mounting those and putting those together. That's obviously for another video. But this one on the 3-into-1 Kohler, I think that's it for this video. Thank you very much, guys, for watching. If you could please like, share, and subscribe. If you would please, if you feel cool about it, leave a comment below and give the video a thumbs up. It's always much appreciated. And as always, until the next project, have a nice day.